afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We are really excited to talk today about models of virtual exchange programs at the K12 level. My name is Andy Schaefer, and I'm a Senior Program Associate with the Stevens Initiative. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the initiative, the Stevens Initiative is an international effort to build global competence for young people in the United States and the Middle East and North Africa by growing and enhancing the field of virtual exchange. I am joined today by three speakers representing three very different models of virtual exchange who will appear on your screen on video in just a few moments, or in just a few minutes. Jennifer Chen is a program officer at World Learning. Nicole Goggin is Director of Programs at Global Nomads Group. And Travis Hardy is Manager for Content and Community Engagement at Empatico. This is the second in a series of webinars exploring different models of virtual exchange. We hosted a webinar on models of virtual exchange at the higher education level about 2 weeks ago. And if you're interested in watching that recording, it will be available on the Stevens Initiative's YouTube page in the coming weeks. And before we get started today, I'll mention just a few housekeeping notes. We encourage all of you watching to tweet about the conversation today by tagging us at StevensInit. It should be in the lower right-hand corner of your screen there. And by using the hashtag WorldClassConnection. You should have received all of the bios of our speakers today and the program materials that were sent to you. If you did not receive them, you can check our website, stevensinitiative.org. We will be saving time at the end of the webinar to address your questions, so please direct any questions over the course of the webinar to the Q&A box that should be at the bottom of your screen. For those of you who are joining the webinar who may be less familiar with virtual exchange, I want to talk briefly about what it is and why it's important. Virtual exchange is technology-enabled, collaborative, international learning. We all know that only a very small subset of youth have access to in-person international exchange experiences like studying abroad. Virtual exchange, therefore, can be an accessible way for more youth to have a cross-cultural experience without having to leave their hometown. Not only can virtual exchange be a means to student learning about a particular topic, it can also help youth gain the skills that they need to prosper in an increasingly connected world and workforce, while also being accessible to those who do not have the ability to travel abroad. While virtual exchange programs do have costs associated with them, the cost is significantly lower per person than an in-person exchange, making it an affordable alternative. So we're going to take a few minutes before the panel discussion of today's webinar to walk through a couple of things to work on or to consider in a virtual exchange program design. We're only going to take a few minutes to talk through some variables in program design, but there are probably about a half dozen more that we're not going to be able to get to today and would love to talk about if we had time. I think it's also worth mentioning that the variables we're going to discuss today are going to be presented simply for the sake of ease and for time. We acknowledge that there can be a lot of overlap and innovation within these variables, which some of our speakers today will address during our conversation. And lastly, it's also worth mentioning that while this webinar focuses on K through 12, the Stevens Initiative uses this term broadly to refer to youth at a primary or at a secondary age. Some of the programs that you'll hear from today include youth participating completely outside of a traditional educational institution. So the first thing to consider is who the program is intended for and what is the need. Are you targeting students in a particular field of study, for example? Why is virtual exchange important to that group? What gaps does this program address? Developing the value proposition of your program will guide the rest of the program design. Think about how participants get involved. In a course or a classroom in which participation in the exchange is necessary for some kind of credit or classroom completion, classrooms may be connected in some way with a partner classroom or maybe grouped together with several classrooms around the world. Participants may get involved through an extracurricular program, either through an educational institution or in something like an after-school club. There may also be some kind of a hybrid program in which a virtual exchange is incorporated into a classroom, but grade or participation implications may vary. What do the participants do? Participants may work collaboratively on a project, or they may collaborate on developing their own individual projects. Projects could range from topics like sustainable development goals to a community-based project or a cultural project or even a science or coding project. There's a lot of variety. Or a program may be focused on dialogue or discussion or storytelling. Participants, of course, have to engage in dialogue while working on a project, but some programs specifically focus on dialogue. There are a couple of things to consider in how the virtual exchange actually occurs. Exchange may occur entirely in real time through video conferencing, for example, or they may occur entirely in non-real time. Youth may engage through emails or blog posts, discussion forums, or learning management systems. Often a program can include both synchronous and asynchronous methods of communication. You should also consider the size of participant dialogue. There are many different ways in which cross-cultural communication can occur. Perhaps communication is occurring classroom to classroom, and entire classes are engaging in a facilitated dialogue. Participants could be broken up into small groups with their peers to deepen their communication or to complete a project together. Or participants may be paired with a partner abroad. It's entirely feasible that more than one of these could occur in a program. For example, an exchange involving whole classroom discussions with a paired classroom abroad could also include a smaller group discussion component. And lastly, you should consider the cadence and contact hours of a program. Some programs may take place over a relatively short period of time, and some programs may take place over the course of a full academic semester or even a full academic year. The number of contact hours will vary. There's no perfect formula, and it depends on the needs and considerations of your participants and your faculty and your partners. But it's important to find a triangulation that allows for meaningful contact between youth. When designing a program, it's important to think about the topic of the virtual exchange. Virtual exchange can be incorporated into any topic or discipline, ranging from robotics to language learning to social studies. There are some common intended outcomes in virtual exchange related to 21st century skills and to global competencies such as cross-cultural collaboration or perspective taking. And the topic of the exchange doesn't always have to be the intended outcome. A virtual exchange program could be centered on cross-cultural dialogue, which may be the intended outcome, but an exchange could also be about learning coding with an intended outcome of cross-cultural collaboration and skills. It's important for a virtual exchange to be facilitated in order to ensure the program is impactful and safe for the participants. The way in which programs are facilitated may vary. Educators implementing joint classrooms or joint partnership classrooms, for example, may facilitate the program. Or a program might be facilitated by external individual adults who have received some training, or even near peers who have been trained to facilitate cross-cultural dialogue and virtual exchange. Lastly, there are just a few other additional items to consider that we won't go into too deeply today, but what kinds of partnerships exist in order to make the program happen, and how are those partnerships managed? Think about how the program is funded. Is it funded through tuition at a school, for example, or do institutions pay to participate in a program or otherwise? Is the program a precursor to an in-person exchange program? So I hope that gave you all a couple of things to talk about. We are going to turn things over now to our distinguished speakers and ask that everyone turns on their video. We'll give everyone just a sec. Wonderful, great. So as I mentioned before, I am joined by Jennifer Chen, Nicole Goggin, and Travis Hardy today. So if I could please ask each of you to introduce yourselves and the programs that you all represent. I will start with Travis.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Travis, and I work on programs at Empatico. Empatico is a free all-in-one platform for educators to connect their classroom with a partner class somewhere else in the world through a combination of live video interactions and activities that are designed to foster meaningful connections among students ages 6 to 11, so at the primary level. Our model is one full class to another full class and mostly focuses on these live video exchanges between two partner classrooms, usually in a traditional school setting, but also with summer camps and after-school programs. Our platform includes everything teachers need to connect their classroom in one place, including a matching algorithm that helps pair off classrooms, messaging and scheduling tools, file sharing features, activity plans to help structure the exchanges, and the actual built-in video chat tool itself.
Thank you. I'll ask Nicole next to introduce herself.
Sure. Hi, everyone. So I'm Nicole from Global Nomads Group. I'm the Director of Program Operations. Global Nomads Group aims to build a generation of youth who are empathetic, globally aware, and empowered to take positive action in their communities. Our programs are rooted in storytelling for middle and high school youth, which allow youth to resonate and empathize with their global peers while also learning about their culture, social issues, and daily life. We have two programs that offer very different structures for our diverse educators to choose which best suits them. Our collaborating classroom program connects up to 4 global educators to implement the same curriculum over a semester. And this guides educators through activities on identity, challenging stereotypes, and writing their own personal story. After each lesson, students are prompted to post on the online platform to kickstart the discussion via text, photos, and short videos. And the program culminates in a story share event where students get to practice their public speaking skills and share not only their personal story, but one of their newfound global peers. And then our Student to World program engages students in activities focused on a specific theme, like ocean health and art in action, and culminates in an action plan. Each module takes about 3 hours and starts with a mini lesson and prompts students to choose from Global Media Resource Library to expand their knowledge. And then they read stories from other global youth to learn directly from their peers. Finally, they post their story. And we prompt students when posting their story to make the connections between the topic and the stories that they just read from their global peers.
Thank you. And last but not least, Jen.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jen, and I am a program officer at World Learning. World Learning, we are a nonprofit organization, and we work in exchange programs and also in international development. I work specifically on a program called the Experiment Digital, and it is an online exchange program for high school students in the United States and 3 MENA countries, which are Algeria, Iraq, and Yemen. The goal of our program is threefold. One, we develop students' leadership skills. Second, we promote mutual understanding between the students. And then third, we encourage them to become more civically engaged. Our model is completely for students to sign up independently so they can apply to our program. And it's for 8 weeks during the summer. And once they're selected in our program, we connect them through an online platform. We use Slack. And on the online platform, they talk with each other through asynchronous discussions. And we also have synchronous video conversations in small groups. And we talk about digital citizenship, leadership, community initiatives, and also culminate it into a personal narrative to help them advocate for themselves and in their communities.
Wonderful. So I want to start to dig into each of your programs, and I want to go back to that first element that we walked through, which is the need. So Jen, I'd like to start with you. How do you assert the value proposition of the experiment digital? I think we all have somewhat similar desires for the outcomes of our programs, like cross-cultural learning or technical skills, global competence, but what need is the experiment digital specifically filling?
Yeah, I think is really about civic activism. I think we share a lot of similar goals in doing virtual exchange, but one component of our program is to get the youth to become global active citizens in their communities after the program. So during the experiment digital, we actually guide them through a project planning process where they start with using a design thinking methodology and devise a how might we question. So how might we encourage more recycling in our communities? And through that question, they then devise solutions, conduct needs assessments in their communities, write SMART goals, and we really prepare them to put together a concrete action plan that they can then implement to address change in their communities. And we've seen our alumni start clothing drives. We have students in Sacramento, California, who started a fundraiser to help provide more halal food options for incoming refugees. We have students who actually started their own organizations or digital storytelling projects. So I think one component is really to get them more civically engaged in their communities.
Great. I'm curious what our other speakers have to say about each of their programs. I might turn to you, Travis. The Empatico program is targeting such a young group of students and probably one of the, youngest leading programs. So I'd be curious for your thoughts about the need that Empatico is filling.
Yeah, so Empatico was created as a tool for teachers who work with younger children, as you mentioned, to really promote empathy in students around the world. And when we launched Empatico 2 years ago, one thing we really honed in on was something called the intergroup empathy gap, which stipulates that as humans, we have a tendency to feel more empathy for people whom we perceive to be similar to us, as opposed to people who we perceive as being different. So we really see a need to narrow that gap among future generations and give students at this young age an opportunity to recognize their shared humanity with diverse peers and feel empathy towards others who are different. So throughout our activities, we've written in and tried to encourage moments that are known to help improve children's perceptions of peers from other sociocultural identity groups, such as recognizing similarities, sharing personal stories, appreciating differences, and practicing perspective taking, which is cognitive empathy.
And I think a lot of the activities that participants work on in Empatico are about kind of sharing those stories that allow for those outcomes.
Absolutely.
Great. Nicole, do you have thoughts that you can offer about Campfire and Student to World? Or connected classrooms, I guess, and Student to World.
Absolutely. So I think, in addition, middle school and high school kids are really starting to come into their own identity and develop perceptions of others. And that can come from a multitude of places, whether in the media or from their parents or community. And so when we connect youth who are mainly from the United States and the Middle East and North Africa we're really giving them the opportunity to have open and honest conversations that are monitored and appropriate and guided by adults who can help facilitate those conversations. And our activities aim to bring out stories. I think the storytelling component is really important because it allows youth to empathize and resonate with their peers who may seem very far away or distant and different from one another. So it's about embracing both the similarities and differences by sharing them as it relates to stories and parts of their own lives.
Great. I heard kind of common themes of empathy from all of you, as well as, you know, I think Jen, with the Experiment Digital especially, you're focusing on community activism and building leadership, which is really exciting. I want to talk next about how these programs actually happen. You know, I'd like to focus a little bit on how this might happen in the context of an actual school. So I want to direct this question to you, Travis. A lot of K12 institutions, I imagine you're working primarily with elementary schools and middle schools, they have pretty structured curricula and standards that they need to meet compared to a university, for example. So can you talk to us about how Empatico's programming is actually incorporated into classrooms and into schools?
Yeah, definitely. So we designed our activities to cover a variety of universal topics that teachers might cover throughout a school year, like storytelling and folktales, community mapping, weather, energy, and also to support a range of student learning goals and skills required for different regional, national, and international standards, including frameworks that are focused on social studies or English language arts, STEM, social emotional learning, etc. But I think what's been successful for us and our partners is kind of synthesizing these different disciplines to take a more interdisciplinary approach that allows educators to weave their Empatico experiences throughout their school day. So for example, I mentioned the importance of perspective taking to our mission, and it's also one of the 4 core Empatico skills that students practice during our activities and exchanges. And the skill not only aligns with something like CASEL's framework for social and emotional learning competencies, but it's also part of the civics component of the C3 framework for social studies state standards, and being able to compare one's own point of view with others' perspectives and applying civic virtues in your school in order to work together, as well as Common Core ELA standards and being able to distinguish one's own point of view from a narrator or a character in a book or someone else. And we're even now working on a STEMpathy unit around design thinking that focuses on perspective taking to solve your partner classroom's needs as they relate to weather challenges. So that's just an example of one skill, but there's a lot more you can kind of explore in our standards and learning outcomes guide online to see how we're supporting educators meet their curricular requirements.
I'm curious if you've had a similar experience, Nicole, also working with middle schools and high schools. You know, does Travis's experience resonate with you, or have you had a different experience with integrating Campfire into schools and classrooms?
Yeah, absolutely. Educators these days are so busy with everything that they have to do, whether it's meeting standards, attending school assemblies, writing IEPs. And so I think creating programs that allow for flexibility and hit on multiple disciplinaries and themes, I think are really important. And that's something we tried to do when we incorporated our Student to World program that allows for educators to implement at a time that works best for them. And they can do so either once a week for a semester as like a fun Friday activity for their students to really engage and get those global perspectives into the classroom, or they can do as a curricular unit. Our Student to World program hits on a lot of different themes, and we're growing each theme. We're growing new themes each year. So Ocean Health talks a lot about the environment and plastic youth, where Art in Action really focuses on utilizing art in many different forms to advocate or raise awareness for a particular social issue that resonates with students. And so it allows for, it's very multidisciplinary and still rooted in storytelling. And then that also allows us to, align to various standards, kind of like what Travis was saying, we align to next generation science standards and ELL, as well as ELA, Common Core standards, CASEL social emotional learning standards, and Asia Society's global competency standards.
Great, thank you. I want to talk next about some of the technology that is used in these programs and how youth are actually interacting. So Nicole, most of Campfire's programs tend to be entirely or almost entirely asynchronous, meaning that participants are communicating on their own time or through things like message boards or emails or the learning management system. So how is this kind of communication important to the program that you're running and to the outcomes that you're seeking to achieve?
Yeah, so I think this is a great segue from the previous question that talked about, how do we get educators who have so much on their plate in traditional school settings to bring in those global perspectives that they want to but have limited time. And so asynchronous connections allow for flexibility and decrease some of the barriers that might exist in certain environments. So with asynchronous connections, meaning that people aren't connected face to face like we are right now, but they're connected via an online platform that they can revisit at their leisure. It allows us to, educators to not have to coordinate over time zone differences. Speaking about, the partnerships in which we work with in the United States and the Middle East and North Africa, you're talking about a 6 to 7 hour time difference in some cases. And so that's really tricky for traditional schools or even some youth development organizations that operate after school hours. It also allows for, with video conferencing, sometimes you have to have a higher bandwidth, and to withstand an hour-long video conference could be really tricky. So it allows for people to work kind of with their technology that they have and the ability to access when they have that available to them. Again, it's, we set general deadlines and timelines for our educators to help guide them along of what we think might work well, but it gives them the flexibility to say, you know what, I'm going to implement this on Fridays because that's the time that I have set for my advisory period. Whereas maybe someone in Jordan might do this completely out of school and in an after school weekend setting where they're doing it on Saturdays. And those groups of students can still make the connections and learn from one another without having to, interact on the same time. We've also incorporated Flipgrid, which is an educational tool that allows youth to record short videos. So it gives that face-to-face, same kind of feel, but it doesn't require the time zones. And of course, we always encourage our educators and participants to engage in video conferences. And so when you join a Global Nomads Group program, you're engaged in a network of educators who, if they have the opportunity, it might not be the one you're specifically connected to, but you can connect to another educator, maybe in a different part of the United States or a different part of the world, who might be able to make that video conference connection.
On the other hand, Jen, I think in the Experiment Digital, you use both synchronous and asynchronous methods of communication with kind of different sizes of groups. Can you talk about that and why that works for your program?
Yeah, so we do, I would say maybe 75% asynchronous and about 25% synchronous. For the asynchronous components, I really resonate with what Nicole said. I think we have all our program activities on Slack. And so that really allows for students to come online at any time and send a message. And we have students in 4 different countries, and so that really accommodates for the time difference. I think another thing is a lot of our students, they like English language levels, they may want to take some time to read through it and think and not necessarily respond right away. And so that asynchronous platform also allows for them to share that. And our program is over the summer, and so a lot of US students we've seen take on a lot of things over the summer, and so it allows for that scheduling flexibility. And we really emphasize you can put in as much as you want and you get out of it as much as you put in. So I think that asynchronous component allows for students to engage at a level that they can. And then for our synchronous components, we divide all our students up into what we call families. So they're in groups of 3 to 5. And so in these small families, they do coordinate online video conference calls every 2 weeks. And those dates are set beforehand. We send them out in an email when we announce the program, and we really encourage them to save the dates. We do find the online dialogues, even though they're harder to coordinate, they've always been kind of the highest rated and the most kind of meaningful experience that they get, where they connect in video, through video, see each other in each other's settings. We do those in a more dialogue format. So we have reflective questions led by our facilitators who guide them through a more deeper discussion on things that they learned that week, and to be able to integrate their more personal experiences into it. So yeah, we do a combination of asynchronous and synchronous, and the sizing of it is smaller for the synchronous components.
Great. And then on the completely other end of the spectrum is Empatico, in which student interactions are entirely through video conference. Why is that important to the work that you're doing, Travis?
Yeah, well, I think first I would just say, I agree with what both Nicole and Jen mentioned, that time zones and scheduling are one of the biggest challenges of the live exchanges. So when we created Empatico, one of the things we designed it around was the ability to match teachers based on their overlapping schedules, so that when a teacher signs up, they enter in their availability for a live video conference during a typical week at school. And then we're matching teachers partially based on those overlapping schedules. And then they can kind of see that within their dashboard and their Empatico accounts to help them schedule their exchanges, to try to make that as seamless as possible. And then we design all of our activities around these live exchanges to kind of create these magical moments between children during a live video conversation. So there's something that the kids are preparing to share in their classroom before the exchange. We provide a suggested structure for those live meaningful conversations, and then time to reflect as a class after. I mentioned earlier that one of the key pieces of helping children from different backgrounds overcome the intergroup empathy gap is perceiving that they have similarities with one another. And one thing that we try to reinforce during the live exchanges is the Me Too signal in sign language, which students would use anytime they hear or see that they have something in common with their partner classmates during a live exchange. And it really helps students visually recognize in the moment that they're similar and maybe not as different as they thought before the live exchange.
I have many more questions for all of you, and I think I'll maybe ask one more, but in just a few minutes, we're also going to move over to the audience Q&A portion of our webinar. So just a reminder to please submit questions using that Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And we will be turning over to that in just a moment. But the last question that I want to ask you all about is the facilitation of the program. You all have slightly different models of facilitation, and maybe we can start with Jen, because in the Experiment Digital, the program is largely facilitated both by the staff at World Learning, but also by near peer facilitators, many of whom are alumni of the program. Why did you select that as your method for facilitation, and what are the benefits of doing it that way?
Yeah, so as Andy mentioned, our program, for example, this summer we have over 400 students, and we divide them up into groups, what we call neighborhoods, and they're each led by a facilitator. So these facilitators are typically alumni of our program, and so let's say they finished the program in 2017, they're high school students, so right now they can actually still be in high school or have entered or started at college. So they're pretty similar in age to our participants. And the reason why we did that is, one, a lot of our participants really want to give back to the program and continue to engage and exchange in some way. And they have the best knowledge of how the program operates and what the program needs, having gone through them themselves. And so we take advantage of their interest and really encourage them to come back and practice the leadership skills that we've taught them through the program. Second is they've also been the ones to implement projects in their communities. And so being able to see a peer who's done something similar as a role model. I think sometimes the idea of implementing a project in your community can be kind of intimidating and can seem really far-fetched, but to be able to see someone who is just like you in age or where they are in life to have done something like that, to feel motivated and encouraged to then do something and to kind of serve as a peer mentor as well. I think, yeah, third is really just engaging with high school students. I think it takes a lot more thought to think about how to respond to high school students, and also we realize the relationship that's been developed between the facilitator and the participants is really what retains their interest. And so I think for a high school student who just finished, to really understand what they're going through and to be able to respond to the messages in a way, even in like how you type it, can really make a difference. And if you speak too formally, are you too much like an educator versus like someone who can really understand you? I think that's something that we can really get from our alumni. And so, yeah, we recruit primarily from our alumni group for them to become facilitators. And we've had alumni who's come back and done this more than 2 years now.
That's great. Travis and Nicole, I'm curious for both of your thoughts about this. Obviously, you both are engaging educators as facilitators in these programs. And despite it being a very different program, I'm guessing a lot of what Jen just said resonates, especially around this age group. What are your thoughts about, how educators can be impactful facilitators in a virtual exchange?
Yeah, I can jump in. So we have educators in the traditional sense, and we also work with youth development organizations. So we have, in some cases, site directors or volunteers as our facilitators. And even in the educator realm, we work with public schools, charter schools, private schools. So we really span a diverse group of facilitators who are utilizing our curricula and implementing our programs with the youth that they work with. And so for us, that meant it was really important that we provide robust training to these facilitators. So we have online training courses that really support all of our facilitators and making sure that they're prepared and empowered to take our programs and work with the youth that they're working with. So regardless of their pedagogical approach or amount of training, they're comfortable with the platform, the curriculum. We're giving them ELL resources if they're working with students who are just learning English or even learning a different language. We have some foreign language classes utilizing our programs as well. And they also go through the parts of the program themselves. So they're really getting that youth experience before they actually take it into their classroom or group setting. So it's more about prepping on the front end with whomever our facilitators might be and ensuring that they're comfortable with the program. And then we have dedicated staff support who are there throughout the implementation to answer any subsequent questions that the facilitators might have.
Yeah, very similar for Empatico as well. We've also explored kind of in the last year or so, starting to develop some different models around fellowship programs for smaller groups of 20 to 40 educators that we run in partnership with a variety of organizations. So for example, we worked with Participate and their online platform to design an online community of practice model where the Participate staff supports teachers as those educators take a course. Last spring, it was around virtual exchange more broadly. This fall will be about design thinking, and that's a space where educators can kind of learn from one another and support each other as they experience virtual exchange, maybe for the first time. And this year we're also running a fellowship with NSTOY, the National Network of State Teachers of the Year, around service learning, which has a more hands-on kind of approach with what we call mentor fellows, so fellows who participated in previous fellowships to kind of work with a new set of educators and support them throughout their Empatico experience.
Thank you. So I want to turn it over to some of the questions that we've been receiving from the audience. The first question I think is applicable to all of you, so I'd be curious for your brief thoughts on this question. How do you foster deeper conversations among participants, especially if there are cultural differences or misunderstandings?
I can kind of jump in and talk a little bit about this, and I feel like my colleagues here can also share similar thoughts, but I think the storytelling aspect of it is so important. So instead of students or youth who may not even be aware of what or how they're phrasing something, instead of stating facts or just general opinions, they're talking about a story that truly resonates with them, that includes the context of that assignment that the facilitator just led with them. So, instead of talking about, I'm trying to think of a good example, but instead of saying, like, this is just our way of life, this is just how we do it, is like you're telling a story about what happens in a family celebration. And then it really provides a basis for a dialogue to talk more about that experience rather than the specific thing that might seem really different. So including that storytelling aspect of it, I think provides a lot of context where an initial statement might not, and then require questions that might be a little loaded or just move the conversation in a direction that might not be as fruitful than starting with a story.
I 100% agree on the importance of the storytelling moment, building that in throughout the experience to give students that opportunity to share their own experiences. And then we also provide teachers with a resource on how to kind of navigate these trickier moments during live exchanges, particularly when there are cultural differences. So for example, we provide a list of tips on how to encourage students to approach differences with curiosity and kindness, and how to kind of reframe students' comments if they say something negative about maybe a custom that they're not used to. And then encouraging students to practice those empatico skills that I mentioned earlier, like perspective taking, to help them understand how maybe something they said could be interpreted as offensive or hurtful, to use their critical thinking skills to challenge any assumptions that they might have about their partner classmates and their backgrounds. And then really the importance of reflecting after every virtual exchange to kind of consider similarities and differences, maybe how their thinking has changed throughout their experience with the virtual exchange.
And I agree with both, and I think really due to the storytelling component, and we do a lot of photo sharing, something that's very universal across cultures, by what background you come in. We ask students, the most effective one is actually take a picture of your shoe. So we ask students to share a picture of what they're currently wearing, and that kind of signifies we're kind of all on the same page, and then we can go into a deeper discussion about what that picture is about, and then starting to share more personal things. So we start something more universal, and then we get into a deeper conversation from there.
Our next question, I think, can also be directed at all three of you. How long do each of your programs last, and how did you decide on this amount of time?
I can kick off this one. So Empatico activities were designed to be kind of easy entry for a teacher who might be totally new to virtual exchange, or even maybe the expert who wants to start with something smaller. And each activity or exchange experience can only take up to 1 to 3 hours total of class time, including that 30 or so minutes for the live video exchange. But then we see, over nearly half of teachers who complete one of those kind of quick exchanges continues on to have more with the same partner classroom throughout the year. So we try to offer that flexibility that I think we've all mentioned earlier to kind of meet teachers where they are and give them the opportunity to kind of decide what engagement and what level of engagement is right for them.
Yeah, our program is for 8 weeks in the summer, and that's been just a lot of learning that happened throughout the years to kind of pick the right time for that. It's just been mostly based on school schedules and when students get back to school and when they get off of school. And kind of the timing for that, it's been mostly 3 to 4 hours a week so that students can feel like that's enough if they wanted to do something else. And students, of course, can do more than 4 if they have the time.
And in our 2 programs, they offer very different timing. So it really is that level of flexibility that'll work best for the facilitator or the educator, depending on the time that they have. Collaborating classrooms goes over a semester or 10 to 12 weeks. And we encourage at least 2 hours a week to get through all the activities. And that's if you really want a high interactive experience and you have the time to dedicate to that. And also, since our online platform is also accessible via a mobile app, students can continue conversations and some of the online work at home as well, if the educator decides that homework is suitable for the program for them. And then Student to World really came from all the feedback that we incorporate from our educators every time we iterate our programs. And it's meant to be implemented whenever. As I was saying before, like some teachers, it takes about 3 hours per module, and there's 4 modules. So sometimes, if an environmental science teacher is specifically talking about ocean and our impact as humans on the ocean, they'll implement our Student to World Ocean Health program just as a curricular unit over the course of a month. So maybe they'll do it a little bit each day for 3 to 4 weeks, whereas others will use it throughout the semester, just a little bit each week, and incorporate different ways of working with the students in class and online. So it's just really about flexibility and making sure that we have programs that suit multiple environments.
Great. I think we have time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions, and then I'll just have a brief closing question for the 3 of you. But our next audience question, I think this is best directed at Travis and Nicole. How do you find schools or teachers that are interested in getting involved with your program?
I can start. So when we first started Empatico a couple of years ago, began by working with like-minded organizations who have been working closely with teachers for years. I mentioned Participate and NSTOY earlier. We worked with Ashoka, Teach for All, a number of organizations that have kind of that trusted relationships with teachers, and then have kind of worked through them to create these kind of unique and pedagogical experiences, and also to help us kind of promote and grow the teacher network around the world. And we're experimenting more now with programs like our Spark Empathy Grant, which provides funding for classrooms and schools and districts to help them more easily implement Empatico, whether that's for technology or for professional development training. And that's kind of enabled us to work with larger networks of schools and school districts in the US and in other countries. So those are some of the models that we've used to kind of begin building larger relationships with networks of teachers around the world.
Yeah, and similarly, we've worked with larger organizations. In addition to that, we work at many different educational levels to educational service agencies who serve like multiple districts in a particular region. So we've been working with this educational service agency in Kentucky that oversees a very rural area of districts in Kentucky. And so through that relationship, we're able to get a better understanding of the area because we're not there and we don't pretend to know, what specific neighborhood or region needs any kind of particular program. So it really forms that important relationship that we're getting to know our participants, and we're working with someone who can recommend specific district leaders or school leaders who are looking for global competency programs to bring into their school. We also work at the individual educator level. We have, registration application forms, as well as certain fellowship programs that, are training educators to create global programs. And so then we promote our programs through their newsletters, and then they can join us, and we create a whole package for them. And like I said, we work public schools, private schools, charter schools. We really want to make sure we reach as many youth as possible, regardless of the resources that are available. So we do have a financial assistance program. And in the Middle East, North Africa, we work mainly at the partnership level, where we are getting to know them, having virtual and in-person meetings with the administrators there to get a better understanding of the environment and their needs and the goals that they're looking for with regards to what they want to implement with their students. So again, it's just important for us to get a better sense of who those admin and educators and students are before we, bring our programs to them.
Thank you. I know that there are several more unanswered questions, and I apologize that we didn't get to everyone's question today, but we're just about at time. I want to ask one final lightning round question of each of you, like 30-second response. We have talked about many different variables of virtual exchange programs today, but just what is your top line message of what is so special about each of your programs? What is most distinctive and unique? I'm going to start with you, Travis, because you're closest to me on the screen.
Sure. I think for our team, it's the emphasis on empathy outcomes and helping young children overcome the intergroup empathy gap at a time in their lives when they're really open to new experiences. For educators, I think it's the ease of entry for those who are new to virtual exchange and have everything you need built into one tool. And for students, it's those kind of Me Too moments, which tend to happen around things like Fortnite and dancing together.
All right, Jen.
I think it's a program for youth led by youth, Chris. So because of how close in age the facilitators are, and we see the sustainability model for this program for the facilitators to really take ownership over the small groups of students. So yeah, it's a program for youth led by youth.
Nicole.
And for Global Nomads Group, I think it's our intended outcomes of creating this generation of youth who are empathetic and globally aware and taking positive action in their communities, so preparing them for the workforce. For our teachers, it's the flexibility and the full curricular package that we provide them with the online training and the standards aligned curriculum and support. And then for our youth, it's that storytelling element where they can really resonate with one another through text and photos and videos and whatever medium they feel most comfortable with.
Wonderful. Thank you to the three of you so very much for joining us today and for answering audience questions, for providing your insight on your respective programs. I think this was a really fruitful conversation, and we're so grateful for your time. Before we sign off, I just want to let everyone know who's watching that the Stevens Initiative will host a webinar on September 12th on qualitative evaluation methods in virtual exchange. So you can look at our website, stevensinitiative.org, to sign up to attend that webinar, and we'll be hosting other webinars throughout the rest of the year. So thank you all very much. Have a great rest of your day.